All right, here we are in Greenwood
Yeah,
at a bar.
yeah.
Why'd you pick this spot?
Well, I've lived along Aurora Avenue for most of the time I've been here in Seattle. All the time I've been in Seattle, I've lived in District 5. But we just moved here last year, and this was one of the first places we went to in the new neighborhood. It became one of my favorite places because we came here for a Sunday brunch. It was very early, actually. It was perhaps what you'd be considered a blue plate special, and I was just jamming out to the music, a lot of that Y2K, My Chemical Romance, Britney Spears, and I was like, oh no. Are we at that age now where like the music they're playing for the early bird special is music from middle school, high school? But now, you know what? I'm cool with it. I play peace with it. So it's, and also the ambiance is really cool.
How would you describe yourself in this district politically? It seems like in Seattle, everybody's just shades of left. There's people who describe themselves as progressive, people who describe themselves as moderate. I've seen you aligned with the Green Party. How would you describe yourself in the state of this race, especially against your opponent?
I would say I would describe myself as someone who wants to see actual taproot solutions be addressed at the city. My background is to be a consultant. I'm a social equity and a policy advocacy consultant. My entire job every day is to work with folks who are in active states of conflict, who are trying to find multiple pathways towards shared goals. But also being in that space, my background is in social and organizational psychology. So I also know that we as humans love to find different labels and different sort of ways to categorize each other. So I would say that if I'm a progressive to some folks, I'm a progressive. But I feel that really what my goal is how do we actually get to the change?
You actually have a very interesting background in terms of a lived experience. Correct me if I'm wrong. Homeless at one point in time?
Oh, yeah.
How does that shape your policy and your perspective on what is, for a lot of people, the biggest issue in this city?
Yeah, I talk about this a lot, that we have to have both a knowledge of all the different wonkiness, of which I have, right? Of how does policy work? What is policy theory? What is policy strategy? How do we make sure we have the investments we need? And we need to make sure that we are getting to those upstream solutions by not having only a theoretical or philosophical knowledge of it. And that wisdom of lived experience is also where that comes in. Not just my own, but also working as a direct social service worker, being co-chair of Seattle Renter and Disabilities Commission, being in coalition with my community in a way that I can truly amplify their voices and experiences in leadership into policies that's actually going to get to the actual reality on the ground and make sure that we have the solutions that we need.
I'm asking everyone, I mean, I've heard all these ideas over time in Seattle as the situation has continued to manifest. It's the most complicated issue of our times. What's your big idea for changing the trajectory of homelessness?
The biggest issue that we have with homelessness is not only that we don't have enough housing, we also don't have affordable housing, we also don't have accessible housing, we also don't have housing for folks who need to or want to grow in place. For example, if you have permanent supportive housing, most of them, if not all of them, are single resident occupancy. So if you're going into that housing and that's all you can afford, and you get married, you have be partnered, you have a child, then you're back into a situation where you can't grow in your life because of the restrictions that they have. So what's really important, if we want to address folks being unhoused, is we have to see all of the different ways that this issue is being fed from an economics perspective, from the trauma of being outside and sort of the mental health perspective, from the fact that we don't have the housing for all different sort of families, situations, contexts, the longevity, the sustainability, the infrastructure. So we really need to find what those through lines are, those strategies, and address those and make sure that we're not taking effects and making them the cause.
When you were going through your lived experience, what was the key to get out of homelessness?
What was key for me was that folks were actually working with what I was dealing with in the moment and not assuming that they knew what was best for me based on their theoretical understanding. In so many situations, because I've been either homeless or housing unstable since I was a child, even through my teenagehood and my adulthood, that the biggest barrier for me was that there was only social services available for what folks assumed was the issue. Well, it must be because you have trauma, or it must be because you need food, but not too much food. So I don't want to give you too much food stamps, but there wasn't anywhere for me to refrigerate it, right? So my food stamps didn't last very long. Or you seem like you're someone who needs to live in this kind of housing, but what if I wanted to go to school? You can't be a full-time student and go and live in certain sort of income-based housing. So being able to actually have solutions and interventions that's addressing the actual wisdom of lived experience, and folks who are able to then bring in, well, then this is how the system works, here are the barriers, here are the policies that we maybe need to reconstruct or think innovatively of how we can move this forward in an actual effective and sustainable way.
So I want to ask you about one of the things on this issue that's on your website, because it is different than what I've seen other candidates in other districts talk about. Hygiene facilities and mental health care at encampment sites. You're in favor of doing that. My question to you is then, wouldn't that encourage people to stay in tents on encampment sites versus seeking help elsewhere?
No one wants to be outside. I think that that is one of those stereotypes we talked about, right? Is that folks will see folks outside and they might hear, well, they didn't want to take the housing, so they must just want to be out there for whatever reason. But as we talked about, the offers for the housing may not actually be resonant or supportive for their situation. As a direct social service worker, I've been in situations where in a family with 2 parents and children, one of those people in that family was able to receive a housing referral, but it wouldn't accommodate everyone, and they had to make this difficult decision around if they're going to stay together outside or if they're going to wait for housing that's going to work, or is one of them actually going to get housed, and what restrictions that would have, right? So what we don't want to do is forget that these are people, and the statistics show, the data shows that most folks are only about a paycheck or 2 away from being outside themselves. This is not something that folks are choosing to do. It's something that we can still provide that basic empathetic dignity, that folks still want to have showers, still want to have a place to go to the bathroom, especially in a city without public restrooms. And especially in a community sense, if we know that there is increased levels of trash or debris, why not give them the resources to be able to keep that clean and to be able to have that service so that they can have a space that feels humane until they can get the resources and help that fits the situation that they're in.
So are you suggesting that the city, especially if you're elected, should put porta potties at the side of the freeway for the encampments that have been accumulating on state right-of-way land?
Well, it doesn't have to necessarily be on the side of the road, but I mean, we also have to look at this intersectionally, right? We don't really have a lot of public restrooms. More than just folks who are unhoused need public restrooms. I mean, people who are disabled, people who are elderly, young children, people who are birthing folks, all need public restrooms. So it doesn't have to be this all or nothing absolute that, well, we're just going to put porta potties on the side of the highway for unhoused folks to use the restroom. I think we're talking about a deeper sociological and policy failure of what we need in the city. I know we were talking about our tourism. I know if I was a tourist to a specific city that didn't have public restrooms, I wouldn't think very highly of that city. So we need to really think about what that looks like, and perhaps even if we do have spaces where folks can have encampments, or even the tiny homes and expanding the tiny home program, where they can have that space where they are waiting in a structure in shelter where they have access to bathrooms, they have access to trash pickup and collection, while also being housed in a space that gives more human dignity. I mean, even just giving that option and resource can make a world of difference.
So no porta potties at the side of the freeway?
I mean, I don't know who would actually get off of the side of the freeway and use a porta potty, but I think that if we really make sure that we're getting to taproot issues, I think that making sure we have more public restrooms is going to help more than just folks who are outside.
So not to dwell on that particular part of the issue, but okay. In this district, there have been encampments that have been at the side of the freeway, yes, on state right-of-way, that have been associated with crime. Yes. And there are neighbors and people who lived in Seattle who say, hey, this has gone too far, and it's been a jurisdictional tug of war, as you know, because it's state right-of-way. So if you're elected, should the city do more to push the state to find people housing that are living in the middle of the freeway, or to make sure that the freeway rights of way are clear?
We need to make sure that no one is living on the side of the freeway, and that's whether you're in a tent, a sleeping bag, an apartment, a house. We just know that if you're living on the side of the freeway, there's other issues here, including like the environmental impact of being near that much pollution. We know also that sweeps doesn't work, because where else are they going to go? So if we're really looking at how are we going to get to that upstream solution for this, we have to have places for folks to go. We know we don't have the housing for the permanent supportive housing. We don't have the housing in the scattered sites or the private market. They're not accessible, they're not affordable. We don't have enough shelter beds. And even if we wanted to put folks in institutions or the carceral system, we don't have enough of those beds either, and they cost the taxpayers more money. So really, this is not, oh yeah, just let them be on the side of the highway. This is, how do we get to a society where we actually have the resources to help people, and we have the capacity and bandwidth to do that in a way that's sustainable and effective, which we have seen in these various initiatives or pilots that have been sort of launched over the years, but rarely if ever funded to scale. So what would it look like if they were? That's really where it is. But no one at all should be living on the side of the highway or using a bathroom on the side of the highway.
Do you think the KCRHA has been working?
Well, yes, to an extent, and we have this tendency, we look across some of these different models, whether it's KCHRA or others, where they are not being funded to scale. I'm trying to remember the name of it. I want to say it's Excite, or there's this, I talk about it in a blog I wrote about the previous week, where we had the body cam of SPD come out, we had the public drug use ban come out. That whole week I wrote a blog on the ChrisTiana.com website about this program that had a 60 to 70% success rate of not having that recidivism, meaning going into the prisons or the jails and then coming back out, and over a 60% success rate of people being permanently housed, but they were only funded to provide services to 5% of the folks who are qualified to have it. That's an issue I've heard time and time again, whether it's from LEAD, whether it's from DESC, whether it's from all these different sort of organizations and initiatives that's trying to get this work done. But if we're not investing in it, it's sort of like having credit card debt and you're not even paying the interest, you're not even paying the principal. So if we know that we have this growing issue, and we know it's going to take a certain level of investment and energy, but we have historically and systemically underfunded and underinvested in it, then we can't really believe that there's going to be the sort of progress that we need. And being willing to actually give that a shot, especially if they are showing progress, if we do have those benchmarks, if we are being able to see that in our communities, why not?
I'm sure we could talk about this issue all day, but on a couple,
Yes.
couple of other things. Policing, on your website you talk about expanding community policing, but I don't see anything on there about expanding the police department. Mm-hmm. Where do you stand on funding for police?
I believe, and I'm going to be completely honest when I say this, because I think it's important to preface. I'm saying this out of respect for the job of what it means to be a police officer in this city right now. We are relying on the police way too much for too many things that really shouldn't be in their purview, right? Now, if we're looking at how we can make sure that the police is focusing on what we need police for, right? Those top tier priority 4 calls, right? And that all of these other sort of calls that they're being sent to that could be reallocated to the social services, to alternative community services. Why don't we do that so that we relieve the bandwidth and the pressure on SPD so that they can focus on what we need them to do? And we're holding true the data from the Police Enforcement Research Foundation that states that one of the top reasons why police industry has been seeing retention issues and attrition since 2018, by the way, is because of the issues of work-life balance, the high overtime, and the health and wellness aspect. And we see with SPD that about 1/3 of their payroll budget is overtime. We need to actually respect the fact that we are relying on them too much. So why not reallocate that purview? Why not make sure that we are taking a fair approach by seeing what the average cost is for SPD to respond to the calls and the services, and use that as a foundation for reallocating budget, and then continue to look at the progress. I think that it would be a win-win for everyone. Even the police themselves say that there are these calls that they're holding. And the last thing I'll say is, it's an odd thing about me, but I will listen to the police scanner when I can't sleep at night. It's just a fun thing that I've started doing since 2020. I can tell you, listening to the police scanner, there is a huge mix of calls, and sure, there are those priority 4 calls. Something is in progress right now. There's a weapon, there's an immediate issue. Sure, yeah, send the police. But then when it's like there's someone going down the street, or they're in the middle of the street in a shopping cart with a trash can on their head singing Yankee Doodle Dandy, I don't know if we need to make sure that the police are responding to that, especially if we already have a 7-minute response time and we're trying to reduce that bandwidth. Why not intentionally have alternative community services that can hold that space so that we can actually have the police do what we need them to do?
You make a fair point with all that, but I think there'd be pushback with the idea that Seattle police say call times are up. Gurmai Zahalai, the King County Council member who's endorsed you, says violent crime is up.
Yeah.
Homicides are up. So with all that said, how do you reduce call times without the police?
I believe that the call times, I mean, I still believe that there are some of these, first of all, let's just say this. Homicides are up across the country. This is not a Seattle issue. This is a nationwide issue. And it's been going up consistently since, again, 2018. It got worse over the pandemic, as well as domestic violence crimes and other crimes where folks are experiencing thefts and burglaries. We have to also think about the collective trauma and impact of the pandemic, especially in those early years where we saw an increase in domestic violence, because really as a society we didn't take a break to really process what was going on and the high amounts of loss, especially folks who became sick or they lost their job because their industry was no longer sort of in operation. There's a lot of folks who are hurting because of that, and we're continually in an economic crisis. I mean, we're having this interview on a day where we may have a government shutdown because we can't agree on how we can push forward a budget. We are in a housing crisis across the country. We are in a gun crisis across the country. We are in a situation where, sure, there's an increase in crime. There's an increase in homicides. I admit that. The data is there. I'm not going to argue with the statistics. But what I will argue with and share in opposition to those statistics is that they also show that just increasing police, by nature increasing police, does not decrease that crime. We need to really get down to the root of how we can help provide what folks need so that we can at least try to give resolution for those folks where this is a crime of poverty, a crime of survival. It is because of mental health stuff. It's not going to be 100%, but it's going to be, I think, a significant enough percentage that for those folks, I think that most people are stereotyping as the all or nothing of they're just doing it because they're nasty people. We can't just sort of paint such a broad brush. So why not try to find what we can do for the folks who are at the intersection of this really complicated, complex, volatile time, and at the same time make sure that the police are freed up so that when we do have those situations where we need police to respond because there is active crime or active harm or something that is in threat to community, where we do need the police to be there, they can be there. So they're not somewhere else doing a call priority that could easily be going to another resource.
Part of this whole discussion, it seems like it's a litmus test for everybody. Every candidate has been asked, every council member was asked about drug possession and the drug possession law and whether the state law should be enforced. How do you feel about what was passed by the city council?
First of all, it's relying on the SPD too much again. Again, for something that if it's about making a determination about whether or not someone is a harm to community, that means it's not a priority 4 call. Second of all, it is a service that could easily be done by DESC, Campus Housing Alliance, Plymouth Housing, Pioneer Square, Co-Lead, anyone else who is actively trying to do this work as well, but they're not funded to scale. We wouldn't have to even create a new department to do it. We would just need to fund the people who are trying to do it on a shoestring budget. That's the first thing. The second thing is we just went through the 80s and 90s and early 2000s and saw that the war on drugs doesn't work. Criminalizing drug use and possession doesn't work, and putting folks in these carceral beds, again, at the end of the day, is going to cost taxpayers almost twice as much than it would to fund these services and housing to help to have more sustainable solutions. And I don't know about you, even if you feel some sort of way about folks using drugs or whether or not they need access to services, because they can get that through third places, through overdose prevention sites, through permanent supportive housing, but where they're not going to get that is in jail. We know empirically that jail is not a therapeutic space. It is one of the worst places, other than literally getting nothing at all, to get mental health and substance abuse services. And King County Jail has one of the highest suicide rates of any other jail in the country. So if we are trying to have that be the solution to help people, we're not going to be getting to a shared goal on that. If we are wanting to incarcerate people or punish them, then we just need to say that. But right now, the way the bill is written, my understanding is that we want to help these communities. We want to help them get into treatment. We want to help them to have housing. We want to help them to not be using drugs out in public, so we all have community safety. We're not going to be able to do that using tools and approaches that we've already tried and has failed time and time again.
So if somebody's smoking fentanyl here in the Shanghai room or just outside the diner, should they be arrested?
I think that they need to be contacted, but I don't think they need to be arrested, and I don't think that contact should come from the police. It should come from social services. And that social service should not just be available for people who are smoking in public, because, you know, I will just say this. I went to Seattle U. There was a lot of really affluent people there. A lot of parties I went with affluent people. I know that people who are housed, who are highly resourced, also use these drugs. We see these folks using drugs in public because they have access to neither private space nor are they welcome in public space, and they have nowhere else to do it. But what I don't see in this bill is that there is let's say there is someone who has a backyard and they have folks coming over and they decide to smoke an illicit substance in their backyard. The police are not going to come to their house and arrest them, but it's outside, and those fumes could still waft to your neighbor's space. Is that going to be part of it? Or is this put into place specifically for the folks with access to either public or private space? Because if that's the case, then we have to really hold true how inequitable and harmful this is and consider a way that we're going to actually help folks to get the help that they need and not punish them for the circumstances that they find themselves in.
I want to touch on transportation and transit and disability rights. I know this is an issue for you, again, with your lived experience on transportation and transit in this district. What is this city not doing right now that you think you could change if elected to the council?
Well, the biggest thing that we have heard, especially what are they calling it, the hot protest summer or something like that, right? And so we're hearing, especially here, especially with transit operators and drivers, that not only are they not getting paid enough either, as well as the social service workers, the city workers, but they also, they've been woefully underfunded. We've also heard from the community that the transit is not timely, it's not reliable, and especially in District 5, it doesn't go east to west. When I lived up on 145th and Aurora, on a good day, I could smell the Heaven Sent chicken from 145th and Aurora to 145th in Lake City. If I had a car, I could get there in 15 minutes. If I took a bus, I had to take 3 transfers to take me 2.5 hours. We need to make sure that if we truly want folks to see public transit and pedestrian transit as a competitive option to public vehicle use, We have to invest in that, and that goes upstream to make sure that not just the mechanics and the infrastructure of it, but the people who are actually going to drive and upkeep the bus system, that we're going to have these protected bike lanes because we have a incorrigible amount of pedestrian collisions and deaths, that we actually have sidewalks, which is something that I argued for when I was co-chair of Disabilities Commission, and I know that's going to take being able to have a network and being able to have partnerships and work at different levels of governance, finding those multiple pathways, because, you know, especially on Rural Avenue, that's a state highway. So we're gonna have to work with WashDOT as well as other spaces to get those sidewalks. That has to be a partnership. And we know that we are in the middle of a climate disaster. So what can we do to make sure that the transit and the accessibility infrastructure is also speaking to our need to address our reduction for fossil fuels, our reduction for putting more contaminants in the air, and making sure that we are addressing how much we are not only are putting stress on our infrastructure, but that we're actually having infrastructure that's rooted in increased density and sustainability of that density.
Why doesn't North Seattle have sidewalks?
You know, there's a couple of reasons why. I can tell you really quick about Aurora Avenue why they don't have sidewalks. And the reason why is because District 5 was annexed in. You know, and it was annexed in bits and pieces, the last of which was around the 1970s, right? But as they were annexed in, as the city was making investments, they just haven't made investments in District 5. Plus, there's the state highway thing. On top of that, there's a huge history of redlining in different parts of District 5. And there is this interesting stereotype about District 5 where the only folks who live here are wealthy, white, rich homeowners that are retirees or they're tech people and they're just going to drive their cars anyway, or if they are going to use bicycles, it's going to be for their own decision and not because they have to. Well, let me tell you, I am here to tell you that is not the case. This, I mean, and maybe it had in the past, but especially since I've been here since 2010, this district has diversified to have people of the Globe majority, renters, disabled folks, people who use transit, people who are immigrants and refugees, people who have permanent supportive housing, plus housing through Seattle Housing Authority. And the anecdote I always share to prove my point is that there's a Walgreens on 145th, there's a Target at Northgate, and if you go in there, they have a significant ethnic hair care section. And why? Well, let me tell you, as Walgreens being one of my first jobs, you're not going to stock product you can't move. That means people are buying it. And so if we continue to have that stereotype of District 5 got it, they're all these affluent homeowners, and all the folks here who aren't, of which there is, I would argue, a majority. We may not be the loudest, but our representation here in District 5 needs those investments, needs sidewalks for disabled folks, needs different transportation options to get around the city, needs affordable grocery stores, needs to make sure that we have subsidies and protections and rights of return for our community small businesses as a small business owner, so that you don't have commercial leases after development that's 3 times as high, or that we have support for business owners if they do have a situation where they have something stolen out of their store and it impedes their ability to work, that we have affordable housing, that we have housing that an infrastructure where we don't have streets being flooded. There's so much investment that's needed here. And if I was elected for city council, I think a lot of folks have a stereotype or assumption about me that I would just be sort of like rah-rah, progressive, social equity, all those things. And sure, I can have a certain belief and ideology as something, but at the end of the day, again, my job is to find multiple pathways towards shared goals with people with different beliefs, different backgrounds, different ideologies, different approaches, but keep us moving forward, because that's the point. The point is not about who's right, who's wrong. It's about what are we trying to achieve, what's going to make progress, and that's what I would bring to City Council and what I've been able to successfully do in the work I've done so far.
You know, everybody's talking about homelessness and crime and policing, but I don't think anybody's talking with such passion about sidewalks as anybody else that's running for council, including your opponent. How do you feel you are different than your opponent in this race?
You know, some of the things I alluded to about living in 7 different states, living in different socioeconomic classes. You know, with my physical disability, I only started with having MS in 2017. I'm autistic. I have a blended family, right? I am now in a rental single family home for the first time I've ever not lived in an apartment. I share all those things not because I'm trying to do identity politics, right? But what I'm also hoping that you're hearing is that in the work I've done with being a co-chair of Seattle Disabilities Commission and being able to co-organize to pass one of the nation's first bills on sub-minimum wage, the rent stabilization, a 6-month advance notice that went through that was advocated for through the Seattle Renters Commission, and being working with the 250 businesses, organizations, and government entities as a consultant across the country. There's so much of this policy work, advocacy work that I've done mostly back of house, supporting those departments, those agencies, yes, even the court system or the bar, and being able to put that equity progress forward. So if we want to talk about experience and professionalism, I think that we can go toe to toe. But when we talk about actually having a grounded experience in reality, that wisdom of lived experience, not just in this particular intersection, but being part of communities and coalitions and spaces and organizations and movements that has a breadth of multidimensionality and complexity, and being able to move in that with grace, tactfully, diplomatically, and successfully to get to the taproot of the issues and keep us all moving towards our shared goal. That's what I feel I have that's different. Because everyone has a lived experience. True. But I do believe that the way that I've moved in the community and the way that I have shown my track record of success really proves that. And if you want to know a little statistic, if you look at our fundraising numbers for cash donations, and you look at the number of individual donors between me and Kathy, even though the total amount of cash donations may not be as high, the number of individual donors is 3 times as much. Why? Because I come from, as a working class person, a network of folks who are also working class, who are also on SSDI, who also have limited incomes, and so they give $20, $50, $100. But that could be as much as 20% of their monthly income. To have that much support from my community at 3 times the number shows that the work that I've already done in this community so far, folks trust me to take that to City Council and continue that track record of success there.
You just talked a lot about collaboration and sharing experiences and common goals. This council has not been known for that in the last decade. There's been a lot of yelling, a lot of speechifying, a lot of disruptions in the council. The temperature has been hot. Mm-hmm. Are you ready to take the temperature down? Do you think you can take the temperature down?
Let me reiterate. That is my job that I do every single day. I have had to work 40 hours a week campaigning because I'm working class. But that's literally my job. As a matter of fact, the reason I had to come here 15 minutes late is I just got off a training with a client talking about the psychosocial basis of equity work and what is needed to move forward in progress when folks are in conflict. I'm not just ready for that, that's what I do. That's why folks want me to run for office. And I agree, the reason why we haven't seen success is because we're getting caught in the minutia of what is not any of those multiple pathways toward our shared goal. We're all in a rowboat, rowing at different paces and different speeds in different directions. I have, over my track record in my career, been the person that people come to, even leading to the business that I have, because I am the person who's usually able to get folks on track. And I know I look away, that folks may not assume that up front, but as I said, folks who know me and has benefited from that work, that's why they're supporting me to run for office.
Well, thank you for sitting next to the bar without us having a drink, having a good conversation. Thanks for sitting down with me.
Thank you for having me. Excited.